President Trump warned overnight that if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, strikes on Iran's power grid could follow. In an exclusive interview with Fox News from southern Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded by saying Trump knows exactly what he's doing and added that Israel and the United States act together as much as possible in confidence. Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst reported from the southern Israeli city of Arad, where an overnight Iranian ballistic missile strike wounded more than 100 people. The attack left buildings in rubble and created a large impact crater in the city of about 25,000 residents. Netanyahu visited the scene, walked through the debris, and met with survivors. Yingst said the strike on Arad came as Israel continued trying to intercept incoming Iranian ballistic missiles. He also described a broader escalation over the weekend, including missile fire near Jerusalem's Old City and Israeli strikes on Iranian ballistic missile storage sites. According to the report, one of the most alarming developments involved launches from an Iranian base roughly 4,000 kilometers away, with missiles reportedly aimed at a joint US-1 UK base in the Indian Ocean. One missile reportedly fell short, while another was said to have been intercepted by a warship. Yingst said this raised concerns that Iran may now have the range to threaten parts of Europe, including cities such as Berlin or Paris. When asked whether European countries have missile defense systems comparable to those used by Israel and the United States, Yingst said most do not. He noted that even with Israel's advanced systems, including Iron Dome, Arrow, and TH-8, missiles are still reaching civilian areas. He said this has intensified questions about Europe's preparedness for possible long-range missile threats. Yingst also said Netanyahu called on other countries to become directly involved in confronting Iran, arguing that the weekend's events showed a significantly expanded ballistic missile threat. On missile capability, Yingst described the newer Iranian missiles as medium-range and highly precise. He said Iran has demonstrated over recent days that it can strike when and where it chooses. He added that Iran is using not only precision-guided ballistic missiles, but also cluster munitions fitted onto some of them. He said reports from Tel Aviv indicated cluster munitions had also fallen there, while Israelis across the country continued receiving repeated phone alerts telling them to take shelter. According to senior military officials cited by Fox News, the incoming missile fire could continue for at least several more weeks. The discussion also turned to the Gulf states. Yingst said the conflict has exposed serious vulnerabilities in those countries, especially where desalination plants, oil fields, and other critical energy infrastructure are concerned. He explained the situation in terms of defense, offense, and regional relationships. On defense, he said Gulf countries do have air defense systems and can intercept some missiles and drones, but those systems are under strain after weeks of sustained attacks. He noted that Iran has targeted not only military sites but also vital energy infrastructure, including in Qatar, one of the world's leading exporters of liquefied natural gas. On offense, Yingst said both Trump and Netanyahu are pushing for broader action against the Iranian regime. On regional relationships, he said Trump has succeeded in bringing Gulf countries closer together because they now increasingly see Iran as a common enemy. Yingst added that Trump told me he was especially surprised Iran was attacking countries that had not themselves taken military action against it, because doing so could help create a broader coalition against Tehran. According to Yingst, that makes Iran's actions seem strategically self-defeating, but also shows how unpredictable the regime has become and how willing it is to target not only regional rivals, but also energy infrastructure with global importance. A drone camera flies slowly over southern Israel near Arad after a ballistic missile strike, revealing destroyed residential buildings, collapsed rooftops, smoke rising from rubble, and emergency vehicles moving below. Dust hangs in the early morning air as the wide aerial shot establishes a realistic breaking news war aftermath with cinematic tension. The camera slowly pushes toward a massive missile impact crater in the middle of a damaged residential area in Arad, showing broken concrete, twisted metal, shattered glass, and damaged cars nearby. Smoke drifts across the frame while dust moves in the wind, creating a highly detailed and realistic war zone close up. A handheld camera moves through rubble as emergency responders and paramedics rush to help wounded civilians after the missile strike. Stretchers are carried through debris. Ambulance lights flash, and smoke and dust fill the air, giving the scene urgency, chaos, and the feel of intense live news coverage. A tracking shot follows frightened civilians running out of damaged buildings after the missile attack, with families helping each other across dust-covered streets lined with broken windows and smoke in the background. People look back in fear as they move quickly, creating an emotional and realistic wartime escape scene. A field reporter stands in front of destroyed buildings in southern Israel, speaking live during a breaking news broadcast while the camera slowly zooms in. Smoke rises behind him, rescue teams move in the background, and the scene captures the serious tone of real television news coverage in a conflict zone. Benjamin Netanyahu walks carefully through missile strike destruction with security personnel beside him as he inspects rubble and surveys the damage. Rescue workers continue operating in the background among broken buildings and scattered debris while the camera pans beside him in a realistic documentary style. The camera moves slowly across missile strike survivors sitting near rubble in shock, some wrapped in blankets while medics assist them. Dust covers their faces. Broken homes stand behind them and soft morning light filters through smoke, creating a deeply emotional and realistic aftermath scene. An urban street scene in Israel shows civilians suddenly running toward bomb shelters after missile alerts sound. Phones display emergency warning notifications. Tense faces fill the frame, and the handheld camera captures panic, urgency, and the atmosphere of a modern city under ongoing threat. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stands in a tense wartime press setting, speaking seriously to reporters with subtle hand gestures while security personnel remain nearby. The background shows signs of a damaged conflict zone, and the camera slowly pushes in to capture the urgency and gravity of his expression in a realistic documentary style. A wide cinematic shot reveals the city of Arad after the overnight missile strike, with destroyed buildings, smoke rising from impact zones. Emergency responders moving through rubble and injured civilians being helped to safety. The camera sweeps slowly across the devastation to create a breaking news atmosphere filled with realism and tension. Benjamin Netanyahu walks carefully through debris and collapsed structures in Arad, surrounded by his security team while rescue workers continue operations around him. The camera tracks from the side, showing shattered buildings, scattered rubble, and the tense documentary realism of a political leader visiting a wartime disaster scene. Netanyahu meets missile strike survivors among the rubble, speaking with distressed civilians and offering reassurance, while medics and emergency responders work nearby. The scene focuses on emotional human interaction, realistic facial expressions, and the painful atmosphere of people trying to recover after sudden destruction. The night sky over Israel fills with incoming ballistic missiles and interceptor launches, leaving bright trails and explosions in mid-air as air defense systems respond rapidly. The city lights below contrast with the chaos above, creating a dramatic, large-scale wartime defense scene with cinematic intensity near Jerusalem's old city. A missile atmosphere spreads as civilians move quickly. Security forces remain on edge, and distant flashes appear in the sky. The camera tracks through the tense environment, capturing the fear, urgency, and symbolic importance of a historic city under threat. Israeli airstrikes hit Iranian ballistic missile storage facilities, causing massive explosions at remote military compounds as fireballs and thick smoke rise into the night sky. The scene is intense and cinematic, emphasizing the scale of the strike and the dramatic visuals of long-range military retaliation. At a remote Iranian military base, ballistic missiles launch into the sky with bright flames and shockwaves, while military vehicles and launch structures are visible in the dark desert environment. The camera angle is dramatic and realistic, highlighting the power and danger of a long-range missile operation. A joint US-UK military base in the Indian Ocean is shown under missile threat, with radar systems active, military personnel rushing, warships nearby, and tension building across the base. The scene carries a high-stakes global conflict mood, showing how far the danger has spread beyond the immediate region. A ballistic missile loses its trajectory and falls short over the open ocean, descending in flames with a smoke trail cutting across the sky above the dark sea. The scene is captured in a dramatic long-lens style that emphasizes uncertainty, danger, and the scale of the threat. A naval warship intercepts an incoming ballistic missile at sea, launching a defensive missile from its deck before a bright explosion lights up the sky. Radar systems remain active as the ship cuts through the dark ocean, creating an intense military action sequence filled with cinematic realism inside a strategic war room. Glowing digital maps display missile trajectories extending toward Europe, with military analysts studying the possible reach towards cities such as Berlin and Paris. The environment feels tense and futuristic, showing how the conflict is now raising alarm far beyond the Middle East. A major European city skyline appears under a tense missile threat atmosphere, with daily life continuing below while the sky and mood suggest rising danger. The scene uses slow dramatic motion and realistic urban detail to communicate vulnerability and growing geopolitical anxiety. Israel's advanced missile defense systems, including Iron Dome, Arrow, and THID, launch interceptors into the sky as operators monitor screens and coordinate responses. Bright streaks cross overhead, while military technology and human pressure combine in a high-intensity defensive sequence. Despite active missile defense, a civilian neighborhood is shown heavily damaged, with shattered apartment buildings, debris-covered streets, rescue teams searching through wreckage, and injured civilians being evacuated. Smoke drifts across the frame, creating a powerful image of the human cost of war. European military officials gather inside a defense command center, studying radar screens and missile threat maps, with worried expressions as urgent discussions take place. The dim lighting, glowing monitors, and serious tone create a realistic image of governments preparing for a possible expanded threat. Benjamin Netanyahu delivers a forceful wartime statement at a podium surrounded by microphones and national flags, calling on other nations to become directly involved. Media cameras flash as he speaks with a stern expression, creating a high-stakes geopolitical moment in a cinematic documentary style. A fast-paced cinematic montage shows the expanded ballistic missile threat through a sequence of missile launches, interceptions, urban destruction, military command centers. World leaders speaking and civilians sheltering from danger. Smoke, fire, and urgency connect all the visuals into one intense war news climax. A tense military briefing room shows senior officials studying live conflict maps, satellite feeds, and missile trajectory data on large digital screens. Faces are serious, the lighting is dim and strategic, and the atmosphere suggests urgent high-level coordination as the conflict continues to expand. A close cinematic shot shows a commander pointing at a digital map of the Middle East, highlighting missile paths, military bases, and energy infrastructure. Officers around the table watch carefully, creating a realistic war room moment full of pressure and strategic focus. A Gulf energy facility appears under heavy security, with refinery towers, pipelines, storage tanks, and defensive systems visible under a dramatic night sky. The scene emphasizes vulnerability and global importance, showing how critical infrastructure has become part of the wider conflict. Missile defense batteries in a Gulf state prepare for another incoming threat, with radar dishes turning, operators at their stations, and launch systems ready under floodlights. The mood is tense and anticipatory, capturing the strain of repeated attacks over several weeks. A large desalination plant near the coast is shown as a vulnerable strategic asset, with industrial structures, water processing units, and surrounding security forces on alert. The cinematic framing highlights how civilian infrastructure has become central to the regional crisis. Oil fields and industrial energy sites stretch across the landscape while smoke hangs in the distance, suggesting recent attacks or near misses. The camera moves slowly over pipelines, flames, and machinery, reinforcing the economic stakes and fragility of single commodity economies during war. Political leaders from Gulf countries are shown in a formal diplomatic setting, speaking with advisors and military officials as maps and briefing folders lie open on a long table. The tone is serious and coordinated, reflecting new regional alignment against a shared threat. A realistic command and control center shows multiple countries sharing intelligence, with screens displaying air, defense coverage, drone tracks, and missile warnings. Officers from allied states work side by side, creating a visual sense of growing coalition coordination. President Trump appears in a high-stakes presidential setting, speaking firmly on the phone while advisors stand nearby and security briefings cover the desk. The camera captures a decisive leadership moment, emphasizing diplomatic pressure and strategic calculation during a widening regional war. A cinematic sequence shows Gulf air defenses intercepting drones and ballistic threats above industrial zones, with bright explosions in the sky and emergency lights flashing below. The contrast between advanced defense systems and exposed infrastructure adds to the tension and realism. A symbolic regional montage shows military bases, oil infrastructure, desalination plants, command centers, and diplomatic meetings intercut in rapid succession. The pacing builds the sense that the conflict is no longer limited to one front but is affecting the entire region on military, political, and economic levels. The closing shot presents a wide view of the Middle East at night, with city lights, military activity, smoke on the horizon, and a sense of looming escalation. The scene feels cinematic, tense, and global in scale, ending the sequence with the impression of an unstable region on the edge of further war. A tense military briefing room is filled with senior officials studying live conflict maps, satellite feeds, and missile trajectory data displayed across large digital screens. Red and blue markers move across the Middle East as analysts compare incoming intelligence, while dim strategic lighting and the serious faces around the room create a sense of urgent high-level coordination in the middle of an expanding regional war. A close cinematic shot focuses on a military commander standing beside a glowing digital map of the Middle East, pointing toward missile paths, military bases, and vulnerable energy infrastructure. Officers seated around a long command table watch in silence, their attention fixed on the screen as the atmosphere grows heavier with pressure, calculation, and the realization that every next move could reshape the conflict. A Gulf energy facility stands under heavy security at night, with refinery towers, pipelines, storage tanks, and industrial structures stretching into the distance under a dramatic sky. Floodlights cut through the darkness while armed personnel and defensive systems guard the site, emphasizing both the global importance of the infrastructure and the growing fear that strategic energy assets have become central targets in the wider war. Missile defense batteries in a Gulf state prepare for another incoming threat as radar dishes rotate, operators sit at illuminated control stations, and launch systems remain on standby under bright floodlights. The scene carries a constant sense of anticipation, showing the strain on defense crews who have been forced to remain alert night after night during weeks of repeated missile and drone attacks. A large desalination plant near the coast is shown as a highly vulnerable strategic asset, with complex industrial pipes, water processing units, storage systems, and perimeter security all visible in the frame. Military personnel move through the area while warning lights reflect off metal surfaces. And the cinematic composition underlines how even civilian infrastructure tied to daily survival has become part of the regional battlefield. Oil fields and industrial energy sites extend across a vast landscape while dark smoke lingers in the distance, suggesting recent attacks or near misses. The camera moves slowly across pipelines, drilling towers, gas flares, and heavy machinery, creating a powerful visual reminder that in economies built around oil and gas, any strike on infrastructure can trigger consequences far beyond the battlefield. Political leaders from Gulf countries sit in a formal diplomatic setting surrounded by advisors, military officials' briefing folders, and regional maps spread across a long polished table. Their expressions are serious, their body language controlled, and the atmosphere suggests cautious but growing coordination as states with shared vulnerabilities begin aligning more openly against a common threat. A realistic multinational command and control center shows officers from allied countries working side by side as large screens display drone tracks, air defense coverage, missile warnings, and regional intelligence updates. Different uniforms, accents, and systems come together in one tightly controlled room, visually communicating a growing coalition effort built around the need for shared defense and rapid coordination. President Trump appears in a high-stakes presidential setting, speaking firmly on the phone while advisors stand nearby and security briefings, maps, and classified-looking documents cover the desk in front of him. The camera captures a decisive leadership moment, focusing on his expression and posture as the surrounding room reflects diplomatic pressure, military calculation, and the weight of choices that could widen the war. A cinematic sequence shows Gulf air defense systems intercepting drones and ballistic threats above industrial zones, with bright explosions flashing across the night sky while emergency lights pulse below. Refineries, storage tanks, and steel infrastructure remain silhouetted beneath the intercepts, creating a striking contrast between advanced defensive technology and the exposed vulnerability of the economic lifelines they are trying to protect. If you want, I can also turn this into